My name is Marcus. I'm 25, living in a quiet neighborhood just north of Indianapolis. I've always found my purpose in working with my hands. While all my buddies were chasing degrees or settling into cubicles, I spent the last several years pouring every spare cent and moment into learning the art of woodworking. My ambition was to launch my own custom furniture business. A few months back, that dream finally became a reality. It's a humble operation for now. My workshop is my garage, cluttered with tools I've collected over time. I have an old, beat-up pickup truck that groans every time I turn the key, a table saw I bought off a retiring carpenter, a set of well-loved hand planes, and the most basic drill press you can imagine. But they all do their job. That was enough to get me started. I called my business Solid Grain Woodworks and even designed and printed my own business cards at a local copy shop. In the beginning, my clientele consisted of my mum, my aunt, and a couple of guys I knew from high school. I wasn't really turning a profit. Most of the work was done at cost, or for whatever they could offer. I understood that building a reputation was paramount. I repeated a mantra to myself constantly. Treat every single piece like it's destined for a showroom. That's how you get your name out there. One evening I was hunched over my workbench, sketching out a design and worrying if I'd ever land a client who wasn't related to me. My phone vibrated against the wood. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? A voice, smooth and articulate, responded, "Hi, I found one of your cards at a local cafe. I'm interested in commissioning a bookshelf. Are you taking on new projects?" I immediately straightened my back. "Yes, of course. I could come by for a consultation tomorrow, if that's convenient for you." She provided an address in one of the city's most affluent areas. After we hung up, I just stared at my phone for a long moment. This was it. My first real commission. The following afternoon, I loaded a portfolio of my previous work into my truck. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled onto her street. The house was magnificent, a sprawling modern design with large windows and immaculate landscaping, situated in a neighborhood where taste and money were evident. It was sophisticated without being ostentatious. This was the kind of home where every detail was intentional. Taking a deep breath as I stepped out of my truck, I steadied myself with the familiar thought. Just do the work. Be professional. I rang the doorbell. A few moments later, the door swung open. That initial image of her is etched in my memory. She appeared to be in her early 40s, tall and composed, dressed in simple linen trousers and a silk blouse that, while casual, spoke of quiet luxury. Her blonde hair was tied back loosely, and aside from a touch of mascara and lip gloss, she wore no makeup. "Hi, I'm Claire," she said, her smile genuine. "You must be Marcus." "Yes, Mom. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Please, just Claire," she said with a light, easy laugh. She led me through her home, which was just as stunning inside, filled with art and light. We discussed the project in her study, a beautiful room lined with books that were currently stacked on the floor. "My last attempt at a bookshelf came from a box," she explained with a wry smile. "It didn't end well. I need something that will last." I listened, taking detailed notes and measurements. "I'll make sure it's not only built to last, but that it belongs in this room." I went back to my workshop and threw myself into the project. I sourced the perfect walnut, spending hours ensuring every joint was flawless and every surface was sanded to a glassy smoothness. It was more than a job, it was an opportunity to prove myself. A week later, I returned with the finished piece. It was a sweltering day, and carrying the heavy sections of the bookshelf into her house left me drenched in sweat. As I carefully assembled it, I could feel her presence in the room, watching me work. I glanced up at one point and saw her leaning against the doorframe, an appreciative look on her face. I offered a small, awkward smile and refocused on my task. When the final shelf was secured, I stepped back. The piece looked perfect, as if it had always been a part of the room. "It's absolutely beautiful," she said, running a hand over the polished wood. "You truly care about the details." "Thank you. I believe that's what makes the difference." Then, with a charming little smirk, she tilted her head and said the words that would stick with me. "Be careful. I tend to become a loyal patron to artists who care this much." I let out a surprised laugh, unsure how to take the comment. "I'll keep that in mind." She smiled warmly. "I've already sent the payment, and I have a feeling I'll be calling you again very soon." I packed my tools, said goodbye, and drove away with a feeling that had been scarce for a long time, a profound sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this little business of mine was actually going to succeed. 3 weeks passed. I managed to pick up a few smaller jobs, a set of floating shelves, a custom-built dog bed, mostly through word of mouth from my initial circle. I was still hustling, still grinding away in my garage, trying to land any work I could. Each night I'd check my email, hoping for a new inquiry, but the inbox remained quiet. I fought off the creeping sense of discouragement, telling myself, "You're just getting started. It takes time." Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. The screen displayed her name. Claire. I took a breath before answering. "Hello? Hi, Marcus. It's Claire. I hope this is a good time." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even and professional. "Well, I've been thinking about my dining room. It's in desperate need of a new table. The one I have is ancient, and after seeing your work on the bookshelf, I was wondering if you'd be interested in another project." "Absolutely. I can come by this afternoon to discuss it if you're free." "That would be wonderful." I hung up, a wide grin spreading across my face. It wasn't just a one-off job. I had a repeat customer, and a great one at that. I quickly cleaned up my workshop, grabbed my sketchbook and portfolio, and headed over to her place. As I pulled into her driveway, I saw that the bookshelf was visible through the front window, perfectly integrated into the room. I felt a surge of pride. I grabbed my materials and started sketching as soon as I walked inside. The dining room was spacious, with a large bay window overlooking a garden. The project was significantly more complex than the bookshelf, requiring a design that would complement the room's modern aesthetic while still feeling warm and inviting. I wanted to impress her again, not just for the commission but for the validation of my craft. We spent nearly an hour discussing materials, leg styles, and finishes. Claire, I learned, had a background in architecture, which explained her keen eye and precise vocabulary. As I worked on the final sketches, I noticed her watching me, her arms crossed, an intrigued expression on her face. She was wearing simple jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, looking effortlessly elegant. "You really are meticulous," she observed as I measured an angle for the third time. "Details are what separate good from great," I replied, echoing my personal philosophy. She smiled at that. Not enough people believe that anymore. We fell into an easy conversation as I finalized the design. It was casual small talk about the neighborhood, the changing seasons, and the challenges of finding true craftsmanship. I found myself feeling remarkably at ease with her, more so than with most people. I remained focused on the task, but I couldn't ignore how comfortable our rapport was becoming. After I presented the final design, which she approved with genuine enthusiasm, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Marcus, that bookshelf is even more beautiful than I imagined." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Thank you, Claire. I'm glad you're happy with it." Then she did something I didn't expect. She hesitated for a beat before saying, "I know this is unconventional, but I made far too much soup for lunch. Would you be willing to stay and have some? It would be a shame to let it go to waste, and you must be hungry after all this." I blinked, completely caught off guard. It was highly unusual for a client to invite me to share a meal. I wasn't sure how to respond, but she offered a kind, reassuring smile that made it feel like the most natural invitation in the world. "I'd like that, but I wouldn't want to be a bother," I answered politely. "Nonsense," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "It's just lunch. Come on, give yourself a break." Something in her tone put me at ease. I nodded. "All right, thank you." I followed her into the kitchen, a bright, airy space with a large marble island. Her home was just as immaculate and tastefully decorated on the inside as it was on the outside. Modern yet comfortable, with huge windows that bathed every room in soft, natural light. Claire ladled 2 bowls of a rich, aromatic tomato soup and set out a loaf of crusty bread. The conversation flowed even more freely than before. She asked about my business, my inspirations, and my long-term goals. I found myself telling her the unvarnished truth, that I was operating on a shoestring budget, using tools that were older than I was, and dreaming of the day I could afford a proper workshop with my logo on the door. "You have a real passion," she said with a gentle smile. "That's a rare quality." I shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I'm just trying to build something that's mine." After lunch, she offered me coffee, which I accepted. We sat at her kitchen island, just talking. It was strange, but in a good way. There was no pretense, just an unexpected and comfortable connection between 2 people from entirely different walks of life. As the afternoon light began to fade, I stood up and thanked her for the meal. "Thank you, Claire, for everything." She walked me to the door. "I meant what I said before. I'll probably dream up a few more projects for you soon." She teased. I chuckled. "I look forward to it." Driving home that evening, I couldn't stop thinking about how surreal the day had been. I didn't know what it meant, if anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was on the verge of changing in ways I had never anticipated. The following week was a whirlwind of sawdust and stain. I was deep into building Claire's dining table, a project that consumed most of my waking hours. I had also managed to secure a couple of smaller commissions in her neighborhood, thanks to her glowing recommendations. Word traveled quickly among the affluent homeowners, and my reputation for meticulous work was beginning to grow. I was grateful but also bone-tired. Then came Friday afternoon. I was doing a final sanding on the tabletop when my phone buzzed. It was her. "Hey, Marcus, are you free tomorrow afternoon?" I wiped a sheen of sweat from my brow and smiled. "I can be. What's on your mind?" "I have a family heirloom, a small writing desk, that's in desperate need of repair. The leg is wobbly and the finish is a mess. I know you'll treat it with the care it deserves." I agreed without a second's thought. Claire had become my most important client, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy my visits to her home. There was a tranquility about the place, and about her, that I found myself looking forward to. The next morning, I carefully loaded my repair kit into the truck and drove over. As I pulled up, I saw her on the front porch, waving with a smile. She was dressed in a simple white t-shirt and jeans, yet she managed to look as elegant and graceful as ever. "Morning, Marcus." She greeted me warmly. "Morning, Claire. Let's see this desk." We went inside to her office, a cozy room with a view of the garden. The desk was beautiful, a delicate antique, but it was clearly in rough shape. The intricate carvings were caked with years of polish, and one of the legs was precariously loose. "I know it's a big ask," she said apologetically. "Take as much time as you need. I'll be around if you have any questions." I got right to work. The repair was delicate and required intense focus. I spent hours carefully cleaning the old finish, reinforcing the leg joint with custom-cut shims, and meticulously matching the stain. I was completely absorbed in the process. Periodically, I'd notice Claire at the doorway, watching me with a quiet curiosity, or she would appear with a cold glass of water. I initially declined, wanting to stay focused, but she insisted. "Come on, Marcus," she said, placing the cool glass in my hand. "Even the most dedicated artists need to hydrate." I took a short break on her back patio, sipping the water and looking out at her perfect garden. Claire came and sat in the chair beside me. "You're so devoted to your work," she remarked softly. I nodded. "It's my name on the sign, even if the sign is just in my head for now. I want people to associate that name with quality." She smiled at that. "Well, you're certainly succeeding." I went back to work and put the finishing touches on the desk just as the evening sun began to cast long shadows across the lawn. The transformation was remarkable. The wood glowed with a renewed warmth, the carvings were crisp and clean, and the leg was rock solid. It looked like a museum piece. Claire came in and her eyes widened. "Marcus, it's stunning. You brought it back to life." "I'm glad you like it," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Then came the now familiar, yet still surprising moment. She paused, a slight hesitation in her manner, and then said, "Listen, I know this is becoming a habit, but would you like to stay for dinner? It's just me, and I always make too much. Please consider it my way of saying thank you." I hesitated, just as I had before. This was definitely not standard client-contractor protocol, but her casual warmth made it feel completely natural. "Sure," I replied after a moment. "Thank you." I packed away my tools and followed her into the kitchen. Her home felt different at night, warmer and more intimate. Soft jazz was playing from a speaker somewhere in the house, and the aroma of roasted garlic and herbs filled the air. We sat at her kitchen island this time. The conversation picked up seamlessly from where we'd left off. I told her about growing up in a small town, about my dad teaching me how to use tools, and about the constant struggle of trying to make a living from my passion. Claire listened with an attentiveness that made me feel truly heard. It wasn't like an interview or a polite chat. It felt like two friends genuinely getting to know one another. "You're very courageous, you know," she said at one point. "Most people are too afraid to take that kind of risk. I don't know if it's courage or just being too stubborn to quit." I laughed. We finished dinner, and she poured herself a glass of wine. "I know you won't have any because you're driving, but I'm indulging," she said with a playful wink. I smiled. "Fair enough." It was late by the time I finally stood to leave. I thanked her again for her hospitality. As I walked to the front door, she followed and placed a light hand on my arm, stopping me for a second. "I meant what I said. You'll be hearing from me again," she said, her voice soft. I nodded, not quite sure what to say. My heart was beating a little faster than it should have been. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Marcus." I stepped out into the cool night, got into my truck, and just sat there for a minute before turning the ignition. Something about that evening felt significant, like a new chapter was beginning. I didn't know what it was, but I decided not to analyze it. I just smiled to myself and drove home. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. I continued to build my business, taking on any project that came my way. My days were long and physically demanding, starting at dawn and ending well after dusk. But whenever Claire called with a new idea or a small repair, I always made sure to prioritize it, not just because the pay was good, but because I genuinely valued our conversations and the quiet friendship that was developing between us. Claire was unlike anyone I had ever met. She had an effortless grace about her, a calm confidence that was both inspiring and soothing. Every time I arrived at her house, that warm smile of hers seemed to make the grueling hours of labor feel a little lighter. On one of those late summer afternoons, she called again. "Hi, Marcus. I know you must be swamped, but I have a bit of a crisis. My grandmother's old hope chest has a broken hinge, and I don't trust anyone else with it. I'll be there tomorrow, I promised immediately. The next day, I arrived with my specialized tools. The sun was relentless as I worked on her shaded back patio. As I was carefully removing the delicate antique hardware, Claire came outside with 2 frosted bottles of water. "You're going to bake out here?" she teased, handing one to me. "I've worked in worse." I grinned, gratefully taking a long drink. She lingered nearby, leaning against a pillar and watching me work. Our conversations were still easy and friendly, but I could feel a subtle shift, a deepening of our connection. "You know," she said at one point, "I've never met anyone who puts so much of themselves into their work. You truly love what you do." I nodded, focused on the intricate task at hand. "I'm trying to build something real. Every project is a brick in the foundation." She was quiet for a moment. "It shows." When I finished the repair, the chest looked perfect. I packed up my tools, feeling tired but deeply satisfied. "That looks incredible," she said, running a finger over the seamless repair. "You've earned a rest. Would you like to come in for a bit?" The invitation wasn't flirtatious, not exactly. It was casual, but there was an underlying warmth that I couldn't ignore. I hesitated for only a second. "Sure." Inside, she offered me a seat at the kitchen counter while she poured herself a glass of iced tea. I accepted a bottle of water. We talked about life, about our different worlds, about her career in architecture before she retired early. She spoke of a brief marriage years ago, mentioning it with a kind of detached honesty, free of any bitterness. I told her about my family, about the constant pressure from my grandmother to find a nice girl and settle down, and about my upcoming family reunion, an event I was dreading more than anything. My ex-girlfriend, who had left me because she thought my woodworking dream was a dead end, was going to be there with her new, very successful husband. "I think you'll get there," she said with a quiet confidence, referring to my business goals. "It's just a matter of time." As it got later, I stood to leave, but just as I reached the door, she stopped me. "I've been thinking," she began, her gaze direct and serious. "You don't have to say yes to this, and please don't feel obligated, but I have a proposition for you." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. I had no idea what to expect. "I overheard you on the phone with your mom the other day," she admitted. "About the reunion, about the pressure." I felt a flush of embarrassment. "Oh, it sounds stressful," she continued, her tone empathetic. "And I have an idea that might be a little crazy, but it might also be fun." She took a breath. "What if I went with you, as your fiancé?" I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "My fiancé?" She smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Just for the day. We could pretend. It would get your family off your back, and frankly, I haven't had a good adventure in a while." I was speechless. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The idea was absurd. "Claire, I can't ask you to do that. We're from different worlds. The age difference, no one would ever believe it." "Let me worry about that," she said gently. "Think of it as a favor between friends, a social experiment." I stood there, completely thrown. No one had ever offered to step into my life in such a profound, bizarre, and unexpectedly kind way. I shook my head slowly. "I'll think about it. Thank you, Claire, for even offering." "Of course," she said softly. "Good night, Marcus." "Good night." I walked back to my truck, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to dismiss the idea as insanity, but another part, the part that was weary of the judgment and the constant need to defend my life choices, was undeniably tempted. I drove home in a daze, the weight of her unbelievable offer settling heavily in my chest. I knew I needed time to think. The next few days were a torment. I could barely focus on my work. My mind kept replaying her offer, dissecting it from every possible angle. On one hand, it was a lie, a ridiculous charade that could easily blow up in my face. I prided myself on my honesty and hard work. This felt like a shortcut, a deception. On the other hand, the thought of walking into that reunion with the graceful, intelligent, and beautiful Claire on my arm, of seeing the look on my ex's face, of giving my grandma the satisfaction she so desperately wanted, was intoxicating. By Wednesday, I knew I couldn't leave her hanging any longer. I called and asked if I could stop by. "Of course," she said, her voice as warm and welcoming as ever. "I'll be here all afternoon." I arrived later that day, parking my old truck in its usual spot. I walked to the front door, my stomach churning with a nervousness I had never felt before. She opened it and smiled. "Hey, Marcus." "Hey, Claire." She led me into the living room, and we sat on the sofa. The mood was calm, but I could tell she knew why I was there. "I've been thinking about what you said," I began, my voice a little unsteady. "And I wanted to thank you again. It's the craziest, kindest thing anyone has ever offered me." She nodded, waiting patiently. "I'm going to accept your offer," I said, the words feeling momentous as they left my mouth. "But only if you're absolutely sure. You can back out at any time, no questions asked." Claire smiled, her eyes softening with what looked like relief. "I'm sure. I think it will be fun." We shook hands. In that moment, the dynamic between us shifted into something entirely new. Not client and contractor, not just friends, but co-conspirators in a wild, improbable scheme. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. We spent evenings together, crafting a believable backstory. We decided we'd met through a mutual friend at a gallery opening, that we'd bonded over a shared love for art and design. We invented dates, milestones, and an entire fictional history for our relationship. The more time we spent together, the more the lines between our performance and reality began to blur. I learned about her favorite books, the music she loved, the way she laughed when she was truly amused. I found myself opening up to her in ways I never had with anyone else. I was starting to see her not just as a kind friend or an elegant woman, but as someone I was genuinely, deeply attracted to. The day of the reunion arrived. As we drove out to the state park where my family gathered every year, the air in the car was thick with a nervous energy. Claire was wearing a simple, elegant sundress, and on her left hand she wore a simple silver ring we had bought at an antique shop. Our prop engagement ring. "Ready for this?" she asked, squeezing my hand. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a surge of genuine confidence. "With you?" "Yeah, I'm ready." At the reunion, Claire was nothing short of spectacular. She navigated my chaotic family with an effortless grace that left me in awe. She charmed my gruff uncle, discussed gardening with my aunt, and listened with rapt attention as my grandmother recounted the story of my birth for the 100th time. She spoke about my woodworking with such passion and reverence that even my most skeptical cousins seemed impressed. When my ex, Sarah, approached with her husband, Claire was polite but firm. Her presence alone a testament to a world of sophistication Sarah had always craved, but never achieved. I watched Claire all day, completely mesmerized. I saw the way she made my grandmother's eyes light up, the way she made me feel like the most important man in the world. The pretense, the act, it had all melted away. My feelings for her were terrifyingly real. I was falling completely in love with her. The drive home was quiet. The sun had set, and the dashboard cast a soft glow on our faces. The energy from the day had dissipated, leaving a strange, uncertain silence in its place. The charade was over. I pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. "Well," I said, my voice sounding hollow in the quiet car. "Thank you, Claire, for everything. You were amazing. You have a wonderful family, Marcus," she said softly. I finally found the courage to look at her. I guess we can stop pretending now." The words felt like a punch to my own gut. I didn't want it to be pretend. I wished more than anything that it was real. Seeing the sad, final look in my eyes, I decided to take one last, desperate leap. "The thing is," I said, my heart pounding, "I don't want to stop." She looked at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. A long moment passed, then a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. She reached over and gently touched my cheek. "Who says we're pretending?